Good evening. Welcome to Book It Now. We are live. I'm your humble and gracious host, Q, and I want to thank you all for joining me on this continued journey of empathy. Sorry about that. On this continued journey of empathy, growth, and understanding, we have a very special guest today, and I'm very excited to have her here, Miss Katea Stitt. She is the interim program director of WPFW Pacifica in the DC area. That's 89.3 on your FM dial. Pacifica, WPFW, they're very dedicated to programming with democracy, progressive change, and ensuring that we're getting educated by our peers. You'll find that their programming is a mix of jazz, third world music, and current events and news. But Ms. Stitt is way more than a program director. She launched her own company 25 years ago.
Yes.
And it's the
Long time.
Inyoung Woo.
Yep, Inyoung Woo
Management,
yes.
Which specializes in artists, events, and program management for individuals, ensembles, and organizations alike. Some of her clients that you may be familiar with are in Tozaki Shungay.
Yeah, the dearly departed. She
Dearly
just passed
departed,
away.
yes, rest in peace. The Duke Ellington Jazz Festival. More of you may be familiar with Sweet Honey and the Rock, the
Yes.
3-time Grammy-nominated
Yes.
all African-American female a cappella ensemble. And she's also coordinated the Jazz Oral History Program for the Smithsonian Institute. And she's also the daughter of the great jazz legend Sonny Stitt. I want to thank you for joining us on the
Nice
show.
to meet you, Q.
Apologize
Nice to
for
see
the
you.
phone
That's
ringing.
okay, no
Looks like
worries.
people already want to talk to me here.
I hope so.
But I do want to get started because we have a lot to talk about.
Sure.
But I would like to start with your father.
Absolutely.
Being at the WPFW, like I mentioned, a lot of the programming is jazz and alternative music and
Yes.
news and politics. So growing up with your father, what influence has he had on your life and your career thus far?
Well, so the way I came to WPFW as a young woman,
Yeah.
I was invited there. My mother and I were invited after my father passed in 1982.
Okay.
There was a really beloved programmer by the name of Fish Middleton.
Okay.
He was also the program director, I think, at that time.
Okay.
And he invited us to come and celebrate his birthday, the first birthday after his passing. And I remember that interview because, unlike this one, all I did was giggle the whole time. I was 17. My
Yeah.
father died, and I just, and my mother was great in the interview. So that kind of got me in touch with the radio station. I mean, through his music, but actually, the radio station played a pretty prolific part in his passing too. He had come back from Japan, and he had flown into Kennedy Airport, New York, and he could not get on a second plane to get to D.C. So my mother flew back to make arrangements at Washington Hospital Center, and I rode in the ambulance with him back. And the whole time he had cancer, in advanced lymphoma. And the whole time in the ambulance, I was just praying that please don't let him die on the road. Please, whatever it takes. So he got to Washington Hospital Center. He got a room, of course. They put him in a room. Immediately we turned on the radio, and they were doing all kinds of tributes to him. It was lovely. And
wow.
he listened, and he knew, he could hear, he'd smile. He couldn't speak to us, but he'd smile. And he listened to that radio for a week. And then he passed away. And I don't think I've ever even shared that with anyone that I'm at WPFW with, that it was so instrumental in my father's passing. And I think, honestly, it made his passing easier to hear his music, to know that he was loved,
And
not only by his family.
But the community.
The community.
Yeah.
My mother would often say when she was mad at me, you're just like your father. And I am just like my father.
Yeah.
I love travel, obviously. I should say my mother was a singer. And that's how she met my father at the Howard Theater. She was opening for him. And her stage
Romantic.
name was Pat Gilbert. Yes,
Yeah.
and twice he toured, and she opened for him both times. And the second time, he basically said, listen, I can't court you in the normal way because I'm on the road.
Right.
So he went to my mother lived, she had gone to Howard University, well, DC Teachers College, which was at that point part of Howard University.
Sure.
She had gotten her bachelor's in education, but she was a singer. She wanted to be a singer. And so he went to my grandmother's house where my mother lived. My great-grandmother was there and said, listen, I got to take her on the road with me because that's the only way I can court her. So, and
yeah.
my mother left, and of course they were, I think she was engaged to a pre-med student, so they were really not happy. For a long time, I just have to say, grandmother,
musician?
exactly. And you know, back then it was like, they're smoking reefer, and they're drinking, and they're hanging out. But, you know, she went with him, and they were married until he passed away. I mean, not without bumps, of course. My father, actually, for quite some time, was an alcoholic. He did stop drinking 5 years before he passed away. But, you know, we all have something, and that was my father's cross to bear. But I will say that it didn't impact his music. It didn't impact his love of us and his family. He was fiercely protective of us, and always interesting, you know. That I think that's what I get from my father too. This curiosity. We were talking earlier before the show about our love of podcasts and how it makes you interesting, right? And you find out things about the world beyond where you
Your
are.
bubble, right?
Yeah, and so he would always come back with something. You know, he'd come back from Texas. In fact, there was a club owner in Houston that gave him a little toy poodle and a cowboy hat, and so. He for a while, this little toy poodle he named Jazz.
Jazz, of course.
He would take him on the road with him. He wouldn't leave him at home with us. He'd take him on the road with him. And I can understand it. Like, after having years now been on the road as a tour manager and with artists, the road can get lonely. So I get the reason that he would take as a kid, I was like, why are you taking our dog away? But he really got into cowboy hats, into Stetsons. And he ended up with this collection of hats and this dog. So one time he had to leave Jazz. He was going out the country. And, you know, back then it was like long tours. He'd be gone like 1 or 2 months. He came back. Jazz didn't even know him. He was so upset. But, you know, that kind of, and he never stopped growing in that way. You know, he was into Chinese medicine long before it was a thing. I remember on the bookshelf a copy of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's book, How to Eat to Live. And he prescribed to that kind of eating. He wouldn't let us eat white bread, white flour. He really, you know, he was ahead of his time in a lot of ways. And yeah, I just think that his love of the arts, but my mother had that too. It was my mother actually who instilled music in me, because he would come home from, she was a school teacher. She'd come home from school and she'd play everything from, you know, Three Dog Nights to Burt Bacharach and Dionne Warwick to Parliament Funkadelic. I mean, you know, Betty Davis. I learned about the great Betty Davis, who was Miles Davis's, you know, first wife before Cicely, from her. And like Black Rock. I mean, that was my first experience, you know, so yeah.
So is all that diversity, has that played into who you are today and developing the programs and everything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it informs my programmatic decisions on the air. It also, though, has informed my career in general. You know, I have worked with different kinds of artists. So you mentioned Nsazaki Shange. And most people know her for Colored Girls. You know, she wrote that piece. But she was so much, I mean, I personally get upset when they just reduce her to that.
What are some of your favorite pieces of hers?
Oh, now see, you're putting me on the spot. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the book. I can see the title. But I mean, she was really a prolific poet. Way beyond For Color. Like, For Color Girl was the icing on the cake. She also was a performance poet, one of the first performance poets who worked with musicians. She was working with Art Ensemble of Chicago and David Murray and different people long before there was something called like performance poetry. You know, so she was really a pioneer in that way. She was not only an artist but an activist. If you hear her early interviews, you know, she talks about folks like Angela Davis and Assata Shakur, and how Black women are represented, and owning our narrative and our story.
Absolutely.
So, you know, I mean, that's just a for instance,
but you know, I find that progressive social change is at the heart of what WPFW does as well, right? And you started there as a volunteer about 20 years ago.
20 years ago. I think a little over 20. Yeah.
So what has kept you there? What has kept you inspired to keep growing and continue your service there?
So WPFW was founded in 1977. It was the last of the Pacifica stations. There were 5 of them. So WBAI in New York, KPFT in Houston, KPFK in Los Angeles, and KPFA in Berkeley. That's the flagship station. So Pacifica was founded by Lou Hill, who was a pacifist in 1946. And after the war, he really saw the ravages. He himself had been a veteran. He was also a conscientious objector. He had been jailed many times for his beliefs. And he founded a network. He believed that there was media that would be in line with the values of people. And so individual people like you and I would support it with their donations.
Right.
Excuse me. And that has been the life's blood of Pacifica and, of course, WPFW for these 42 years. We are 95% member supported.
Really?
We have gotten Corporation for Public Broadcasting money over the years, but in these last 10 years or so, we've really been member supported. And it's pretty amazing. For 42 years, it has been that way. So it was founded by a very small group of people here in D.C. And I think, honestly, when they founded Pacifica here in D.C., PFW, they really had a different idea of what it would be. I think they thought it would be much more talk. I think that it would be, frankly, much more white than it ended up being. It ended up being a group of African Americans who came together, Greg Millard, Denise Oliver. I really am going to get in trouble by naming the founders. Lauren Cress Love, who's the sister of Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, and Sagiti Browdy. And they came together and they said, well, we need a station that responds to the 90% black population here that does not have home rule, that cannot govern. The federal government was still dictating what happened in the District of Columbia, remember, at that time. So they really found the station to be a voice to marginalize, which was all of us, black people, in the nation's capital, in Chocolate City. And that's how we manifested a particular vision of social justice, restorative justice, and so that is what keeps me there, because people are still marginalized, people are still left voiceless, people need to be uplifted,
Do you find that having, 90% is incredible, right? Do you find that you're seeing more challenges with the rise of XM and podcasts and these internet radio stations like, we're doing
like
now.
where we're at right
the
now.
internet stations. So
I say the more the merrier. I really think that the more outlets people have to choose from, the more they will listen.
Sure.
And the broader their experience will be, and the more information they can take in. I think to be a well-rounded person, you want to hear all kinds of things.
Absolutely.
And that's the way you learn and grow, right? There is a decline in terrestrial radio in general. So not just with WPFW, but all public media right now is in this kind of decline. But in the same way that record companies are becoming irrelevant, because people can
streaming.
They can put out their own records. They don't need a third party.
Exactly. We had an independent artist here last week, J&B Music.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, been putting out his own music, and we've had Felix Patterson. We have Ethos next week.
Yeah.
So
nice.
all these different artists who are just
right?
independent and doing it their own way.
Yeah.
And so you're not really seeing that affect the way that you all are able to deliver your program.
Not delivering our programming, but of course we see a decline in our numbers in terms of our fundraising effort.
Sure.
Part of it is that we don't spend anything on advertising or marketing. So really, unless you're listening to the station or you see our social media, you may not know we exist. That's a big problem for the station, quite frankly. But it's one that we're trying to overcome. We're trying to move into the 21st century with our social media presence. And we want to invest dollars in advertising and marketing, just so that more people know about us. Yeah, exactly.
Or even aware. Wonderful. And you mentioned, coming up, the social change that was brewing with the launch of WPFW here in the city, and how was the voice for the African Americans. What are you trying to provide to your listeners today?
The same thing. We see the same problems, there are more disenfranchised groups, if you will.
Sure.
No, let me not say that. There's always been the same disenfranchised groups, but because of social media, because of this kind of expansive news coverage that we have, the 24-hour news cycle and the consciousness, we see everything that's happening, right? So it's no longer just about African Americans being pushed out because of gentrification, which has been a long time coming. It's been decades. We're seeing the worst of it right now, but this has been in the making. Marion Barry, God rest his soul, really held back the floodgates of gentrification in Washington, D.C. He did not allow developers to come and own the city the way mayors after him have done. So that is just one piece, though. We can also go to the border here and the situation around immigration. You know, we can go to, because of social media, we saw Arab Spring and we saw the fall of dictatorial governments in the Middle East.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We know right now, recently, exactly. We know right now, you know, unfortunately, the genocide that's happening in the Congo right now, or what's happening in Cabo Delgado in the northern Mozambique, where fundamentalist forces are trying to take over the country, or that part of the country. You know, so, and of course our LGBTQ community, and I want to really lift up our trans
absolutely
community, because they really are going through it, and our trans and LGBTQ youth, who are really... they're not only marginalized, but they're also silenced. They're in the shadows. They're not seen. I heard and I don't mean to digress here, but it's something I'm really passionate about, because I heard that 50% of homeless youth are LGBTQ youth. 50%. And so we talk about trafficking, right? Well, those are the youth that get trafficked because they're just trying to find a place to stay. You know, unfortunately, families don't understand or don't want to take the time to understand. Love is love, you know, and so that is in fact, we talked about it. We're trying to do maybe a day party and for Casa Ruby, which is an organization. You know, Casa Ruby. They do wonderful work.
They do, yeah.
And so we want to do a day party with some trans and queer DJs who are phenomenal.
Yeah.
And you can bring items or you can donate money. But you know, this is how we expand what we do. You know, so it's kind of the same. And of course, we can go forever on police brutality and stop and frisk and jump outs. I mean, all of that we want to make sure we highlight and keep highlighted, because the more it's in our consciousness, the more at some point, hopefully, people hear, and then they're moved to act.
Right.
And that's the purpose of WPFW.
Are you finding yourself successful in these efforts, or the station?
So. Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, I often get calls. So my particular show comes on Wednesday mornings from 5 to 8.
Okay.
And it's a mix of kind of jazz, world music, and definitely social justice, right? And I get calls that say, hey, I heard this interview or heard that interview. Or I get emails saying, thank you so much. I thought no one was paying attention to this.
That's incredible.
You know, so I think people are moved to action, you know, and people have to become activists in the way that they do, right? So for some, it's marching and being out there, being very vocal. For others, it's writing letters. For others, it's simply knowing your neighbors. You know, for some people, it's making sure that they can bring food or clothing or, you know, something that someone needs that they know that might be suffering. Maybe they're depressed. You know, I mean, that's another passion of mine is mental health. Mental health, because we don't talk about it enough. You know, people suffer again in silence when they shouldn't. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It is what you're going through. And that is why we're human beings, right? This is a human experience to help each other.
Yeah, and we had Dr. Frederica Davis, or Brooks Davis, on a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, and she was talking about implementing that in the churches, which are strong Black communities as well, and having that ability to share with one another and get these things off of our chests, so we're not suffering in silence.
And when we speak about it, we often find that everyone in the room has something, right?
Yeah.
You know, and you're like,
someone or is dealing with it in some fashion.
It's like the prison industrial complex. Very few people have not been touched, in some way or another. Yeah. So, and that's and we definitely lift that up. We talk a whole lot about mass incarceration and how to bring restorative justice not only to our adults, but we have a youth restorative justice program led by Love that talks about youth restorative justice.
Yeah.
So, you know, we really try to bring it all in. The big tent, as it were.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
But I do want to switch gears here a bit and talk more about you. And forgive me, but help me with this again. In Yanwu?
In Yanwu Art. Yeah, in Yanwu Management.
In Yanwu Management, which is your artist
management,
event, all kinds of everything, all encompassing, right?
Right. So, So I was an event producer for a long time. Shout out to Karen Spellman, who's one of my mentors. She really taught me how to do events. And she was also a member of SNCC. So, you know, the jazz and the justice part, you know. But for a long time, I was an event producer, curated a series of performances for 4 years for a company called District Curators here in D.C.
How did you get into that?
Karen, really. I came to WPFW as a young person. And she snatched me up and said, hey, you're going to help me with the Capital City Jazz Festival, which predates the Duke Ellington Jazz Festival. We had a jazz festival long before there was a Duke Ellington Jazz Festival, right? Now it's changed the name again. But the DC Jazz Festival is what it's called now. So before there was Duke Ellington or DC, there was a Capital City Jazz Festival,
Right.
and it was a small group of African American producers. I remember Jeff Anthony was working up in New York at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and Karen had been doing festivals and conferences and all. So they all came together, really crack team. And I got to be her assistant for this
Wow.
concert that she was producing for WPFW called Generations of Jazz. So they had the Roney brothers, they had Chico and Von Freeman, they had the Marcelluses, Branford, Ellis Marcellus, the
Wow.
father,
Yeah.
of course Winton, and I think, was Delfeo there? I think he was there as well. And so I produced that concert with her.
That's incredible.
And then she wanted to do this jazz festival. I continued to be her assistant, and I learned that. I did not go to school for that. So I went to school for foreign service, and I
Okay.
thought I was going to become a foreign service officer.
Wow.
But I
That's
do
quite
think,
a shift. I feel.
well, in some ways, I think that what I learned about diplomacy, first of all,
translates.
Secondly, I have been to really interesting parts of the world because of this music, a broad palette of the music. And then in terms of the production skills, if you're organized, if you have a vision, if you can articulate that vision, producing is pretty easy. I don't want to paint it out, you all are producers, but so I found it in Yanwu. I was leaving district curators. What I found over the 4 years I was with them, that there would be a lot of great artists that had management until the deposit came.
Right.
And then the management disappeared. And then all the nuts and bolts of the gig would have to be done with the artist,
Right.
and some of them were great at it and some were not, because the role of the artist often is to create, right? And so not everyone who
stay
is
in that.
creative can take care of the business.
Right.
So after I left, I decided that I would dedicate this company to helping artists manage their creativity, not get in the way, not, sometimes you have managers that are entities unto themselves,
Sure.
which really should not be the case. I feel like anything you do should be in service too. So I began producing events on my own, as well as managing and tour managing artists like Entezaki Shange, like Sekou Sundiata, Sweet Honey in the Rock. I was their executive director for 3 years. Lester Bowie. I mean, it was these are artists. I know people right now listening or seeing it and saying, "But wait, she didn't work with Prince. She didn't work with Gladys Knight. No, I didn't." But whom I love, I love all. But
But nonetheless.
yeah, I just
these
really
are-
stayed in the niche of the performing arts.
What does the name mean?
And Yanwu is a Nigerian Igbo word.
Okay.
And it means
Yanwu.
Eye of the Sun.
In Yanwu, Eye of the Sun. Why? Where does that inspiration come from?
Octavia Butler. So she's long since passed away, but she was a wonderful science fiction writer. And she had a book called Wild Seed, which everyone who's into that genre has read. If you know Octavia Butler, that's like the go-to book,
Wild
right?
Seed.
Yeah, and she has many books. And in fact, I think some of her books they've tried to make into film. Film options haven't been taken, but she was a fantastic writer. So in this particular book, Wild Seed, and Yanwu is the name of the heroine.
Okay.
And so her books really are Afrofuturistic.
Yeah.
So at one moment they're set in early Africa, early countries. In African countries early on. And then it moves to, the way, I tell you, the example we all know is Black Panther.
Okay.
So, like that kind of,
That's pretty.
right, exactly. Moving between time and space.
Right.
But so that's where the name came from. And then I looked it up, and I felt Eye of the Sun was fitting. That's what artists are. They're kind of the eye of the sun for me.
Right, sun. Yeah. What has been the biggest challenge in this journey, I guess?
Well, I would say probably financially, because I've chosen to work with artists or work in a nonprofit realm the majority of my life. The pay scale is different in the nonprofit world. So that's it. But, I feel like the life has been rich. I've got to travel to Pakistan. I've gone to Turkey 3 times. I've gone to Morocco twice and produced radio programs about 2 different festivals there. I've been several times on tours in Europe. I've been touring all over the United States, and I've been able to introduce my daughter to that, who's 17 now, but she's been going on the road and doing things with me since literally the first month. We went to an Omar Zosa concert together. She was like third row, and it was loud. It was percussive. It was piano. So you know how I always have friends that say, "Oh, you're so fortunate. You've always gotten to do what you love to do in the world, since you in your career."
Right.
And I would say to people, yes, but it's not without a sacrifice. I don't drive I drive an Element, which I love, 2004. But I don't drive the latest car. Yeah, exactly. I don't live in a huge mansion. I live in a lovely apartment in Tacoma Park, which fits me. It's kind of hippie, and we like that.
Yeah.
And I feel blessed. And I feel like even those people that say, it's funny too, because there's always people that are making a lot of money, they're driving a Mercedes, they're like, I'm like, but you could do it too.
Yeah.
Whatever your passion is, you have to give up something. You have to, once you have a vision of who you are and how you want to live, you just do that. And what comes. So I would say.
Do you think that's easier said than done, though? Because I feel like a lot of people have what they want to do and what they should do and what they want to do.
Right.
What they should do is the passion. What they want to do is make the money. And sometimes those things don't necessarily align.
I absolutely agree. Yeah. I have a good friend who loves music and really wanted to be a producer, went to Howard University. And because he had 2 children to support, he gave that up and went into IT. But you see, the thing is, as you get older and you recognize that maybe you're not, when you're in your 20s, right? You think you're going to be like you right now. You're going to be here forever.
Yeah.
There's going to be no pitfalls. Nothing's going to happen to you. It's all going to be brilliant and lovely.
That is exactly what I believe, yeah.
Right, and as you should. And I believe the same thing even now. But you start to take stock a different kind of way in what your life has meant. And I agree with you. Sometimes it's at odds. But then you have to make the decision. Hopefully you have people around you, whether that's a spouse, children, that understand that, okay, guys, maybe we have to downsize a little bit. So mom or mom and dad, whomever, can do a little bit of what they want to do in this life.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's a sacrifice,
but
nothing goes without sacrifice. If you're making $200,000 a year, but you're unhappy, that's more of a sacrifice than not making a lot of money. Because you know what?
Right.
You got money will always come. If you're doing what you love, the money will come one way or the other. But if you're unhappy in a job, and think about how much we spend at work, right? How much of our time that's all we have really in life, is ourselves and our time.
Yeah.
We spend all that time miserable. What does that do to your psyche?
Right.
How do you then relate to your loved ones when you come home? Your family, what kind of energy do you have for them?
Right.
I feel like if you do what you love, like you're doing clearly something you love to do, it feeds you. And even with the pitfalls, even with the ups and downs, I remember many times, because I've been in business for myself. I work at WPFW now, but for a good 15, 20 years, I was in business for myself. And I did other stuff, like when it was slow, I painted houses, like walls.
Yeah.
And because I like painting, you know. That's the other thing. You have to be prepared to do whatever it is you need to do to make your dream happen.
Absolutely.
So it is commitment and it's sacrifice, but it's worth it.
So how do you manage doing everything
Oof.
and being a mom, right? So the hardest job in the world with the job you want to do, or the jobs
you
want to do.
Yes, I am honorary Jamaican. That's right. Well, Johanna has a great father. We haven't been together since she was 4, but we remain friends, and we always co-parented well. And for some of that time, my mother was still alive. He's German, so his family's in Germany.
Okay.
But we have also a great community. There's so many people. I'm not going to start shouting out people. But let me tell you, when they say it takes a village,
it does.
It takes a village.
And
so
my mother
I have
can tell
friends.
You that too.
Yeah, we talked. We had the pre-conversation, right? But as women, first of all, I have to say the legacy of all women, but certainly Black women in America, is that you just do what you got to do to make it happen.
Absolutely.
Now, unfortunately, that also has meant that we sacrifice self-care.
The most, yeah.
Right. And then we end up with either illnesses, because illness comes through holding things sometimes. We end up with mental health issues because we're holding too much. But we make whatever has to happen. But I have to say, Sven, her father has been wonderful. He was always there. And I'll give you an example. When she was little, like really little, and she was still breastfeeding, they'd all come to the station with me at 5 a.m. so I could do my show.
Yeah.
So Sven would get up, Johanna would be there. Sometimes I'd have her in the sling in my arms as I was talking on the mic.
Yeah.
And, that's just the way we roll. She's gone on tour with me with Sweet Honey. They welcomed her in. I'd teach her how to give the time calls, like 30 minutes, 15, 5, and they still remember that, and people were just welcoming. They said, hey, and I will say WPFW has always been a place where children were welcome. There are examples like dear Ellen Carter, who does a fantastic show on Monday mornings from 5 until 8 a.m. She was one of the first that I knew of. There were others before her that brought her sons to WPFW. All hours, every meeting, they were in tow. And she was married, but they were there. And they both are phenomenal musicians now, playing with, Mark Carey, Robert Glasper, all kinds of amazing people. So, don't let that stop. You take your children with you. Honestly, as your mother clearly has done, it makes you well-rounded individuals.
Certainly.
It gives you a maturity and a sense of the world and your place in it, and a certain kind of confidence when parents expose you to what they do.
Absolutely.
And so I have a lot of help, but also now she's 17 and we are so close. Like Johanna and I are like tight.
Friends,
Oh yeah, we are. Today we were she was playing Travis Scott for me. She's going to the concert tonight. And we were, jigging it up in the car. And of course she's on Snapchat.
Instagram.
But she also understands when I mean business, And with her father the same. We're just all tight. That and if you got a good base, you got friends, you got family, tell them what you want to do, and don't be like me, as I explained earlier, not ask for help. Ask for help immediately. Because people want to help you with it. Everyone wants to see,
the people who love you.
Yeah, people who love you want to see you win. And if you have people around you that are naysayers and doing things that appear to be helping but not really, you need to think about your circle.
Did any of that feel like a sacrifice in the moment, bringing your infant up and
never
having to none of that?
No,
traveling the world with her and having to consider,
we went to Morocco with her twice.
Really?
Yeah, Sven and I did. We covered the Fez Festival of Sacred Music, which is in Fez, Morocco, and then we went to the Ganawan Festival in Essaouira, which is on the coast, a beautiful little town. Both times with Johanna.
Really?
The first time she was 3.
Okay.
And the second time, it was just the next year. So I think she was like...
Maybe 5.
Yeah, no, not even 5. She was like almost 4.
Okay.
And the second time we went, so the first time was kind of smooth. We flew right in to Fez, but we had her in tow the whole time. So we're down in the Medina. We're everywhere with her all day long. I'm conducting interviews. She's right there. But you know what I have to say? In different parts of the world, we would go sometimes with Sven's family in Germany to the Austrian Alps, and we'd go to restaurants. And it was the first time I experienced, and it's like this on the continent too. You go to any country in Africa, children are not seen like they are in America, where they are something to be placed over here when you do serious things.
Right.
Children are seen as A, a blessing, and B, the fiber of any community. They are like the center. Like we talk about the eye in Yanwu, the eye of the sun. Yeah. They are the eye of the sun. Also on reservations, I have good friends who live on the Salish Kootenai reservation in Montana.
Okay.
And I remember when I got pregnant, I was all freaked out. So I was taking the narrative, I have to have this, I have to have that. So we are looking at houses, getting in fights over the houses, because he's a musician and he has a studio, and that wouldn't work for me. And I remember I called my friend Deanna, and she said, Katea, all she needs is you, Sven, and love.
That's true.
Where you are. And we had a home birth, our family, a small group of family was there. She slept we did the whole family bed. We are hippies, I have to say. I know people out there are like, what? But in other parts of the world, children, that whole seen and not heard thing. So in Austria, in the Alps, you go to a really nice restaurant, not like McDonald's here or something. No shade to other brands. I shouldn't say brands, but fast food. I don't think it's great for us.
It certainly isn't.
But people do it, and some people have to do it because that's what they can afford.
Yeah.
So God bless them.
Sure.
And also it gives them a break, right? Because they have slides and all that stuff. I understand all that. But here you can go to a really nice restaurant and your children can run back and forth. They have a whole play area. They come back to the table. You can have drinks. You can visit with friends, have mature conversation. Same thing in Africa. People, you know, it's like the children just part of what's happening. And I've been fortunate since I was young. I remember 2 friends of mine who had 2 daughters. They'd bring the daughters to the parties. You know, we would be playing music. We'd be dancing. The daughters would be right there. They'd go to sleep in my bedroom, or you know what I mean? Like, and so that kind of community, I mean, that's the way we should be really raising our children, in community. You know, women in other countries, like in Asia, Africa, because they have to, women they give birth, then they put the child on their back, and then they back to doing what was carrying the water in the rice fields, whatever it is. But then when they get of a certain age, right, then they're the ones taking care of the younger ones. You know, it really is that each one teach one, take care of the younger ones. And again, it's so great because children learn from a very early age. It's not all about them. They have to be responsible for something else. Right? Yeah. And our children, I hate to say it, American children, we suffer from that me. It's all about me. And it's not. It's about...
That's my toy. This is my time. This is, you know...
Right. Exactly. So
it's my friend, whatever.
So being a mother has never, ever been... In fact, it's the most beautiful thing that has ever happened to me. And no one can prepare you for... I know now I'm going on about motherhood.
No worries.
But you know, no one can ever... I'm sure your mother would say the same. No one can describe to you what it's like.
Right.
You know, you just feel blessed. If
How
you're
would you
fortunate...
describe it now?
It's just really the gift that is kept on giving. When I have down days, you know, I think I told you about being ill, very ill. For 9 months I had a tremor and I couldn't feed myself. I was in physical and occupational therapy. I woke up from a surgery like this. Wow. Twice a week for like 4 hours each week. My daughter would run home, and God bless our school, they would bring meal. I had dinner brought home every single day for 9 months.
Wow.
Community. And they would... But she would come home and she would say, "Oh, Mama, you're shaking less today." Or "Let me see you walk." Or "Don't forget, we have to do your exercises." You know, same thing with the road. She's the best, like, she's my favorite travel partner to this day. Like, if I want a vacation, she's the one.
She's right there.
Yeah. Because, you know what I mean? She's just great. She's your biggest cheerleader. You know, she's like, you know, and if you're fortunate, you have that. You know, but I think that her father and I, and our family, her family in Germany, that's the other thing. She's a biracial child, right? And she's right, equally steeped in both traditions. She's clearly African American and very woke, you know, charging the way. She just did a radio show on WPFW with some friends on the intersectionality of race and gender.
Sounds really
very woke, but also embracing. She speaks fluent German, not afraid to go anywhere now in the world by herself, ready to fly anywhere, you know, encounter whomever, you know, and take her space. Yeah. And she teaches me how to, because when I look at her, honestly, at 17, honestly, my thought is always, what was I thinking about? Like, I had nothing of this on my mind, right? She's like world citizen and, you know, woke, sophisticated. Yeah. And so you know, you probably do with your mom. You all teach us how to be better people.
Well, that's
grander
people. And I'm hearing, you know, a lot of traveling that you all do together. And I guess my question is, you know, back to Inyanwu.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
What is it that, what are the services that are offered? You know, because I'm hearing a lot of traveling, artist management, producing. What are the services that your company offers?
Excuse me. So it's all of that. It's artist representation. So manager. We do that for artists. We do tour management, which is making sure that all the logistics are handled for either a single gig or a tour of gigs, a string of gigs. So that's everything from, so you get the contract, and you just make sure the contract is executed correctly and the way the artist needs it to be. You're kind of the liaison between the artist and the venue. Okay. But ultimately you're working for the artist, so you always have the artist's perspective in your head. But you know, you try to like liaison for anything else, right? You try to be diplomatic, you try to be kind, you know, because you're also the face of that artist. So we do that, and then we do event production. My personal favorite are concerts and festivals, cultural events, but we do conferences, you know. Usually cultural pieces of conferences I like more, you know. So if you want to, let's say you say, oh, I'm having a, you know, what is it, 100 Concerned Men, Black men. Okay. And they want to do a performance or something at that conference, we would produce something like that. We could produce the conference too, but we would certainly make sure there's a cultural element there. Because I've been drawn to artists and culture because I think it's the way to ensure and work toward a kind of global understanding. Like people, I've been in places, like I said, I was in Lahore, Pakistan, and it was the most amazing thing. So I was there with Defunct, who was this jazz funk band, legendary, Joseph Bowie's band.
Okay.
And then they had this guy who they called the King of Lahore, and he did his thing, you know. And then they got on stage together. Now, he's speaking, you know, not English. I forget what they speak in Pakistan, but he's speaking his language or singing in his language. Joe is singing funk in English. And the two of them are just riffing and going. And
music.
Yeah. And I've seen that play out over and over again, no matter where I was in the world, you know. And so I really believe that if we understood each other's cultures, each other's traditions, and we had real respect, and not this thing of if it comes from America, it must be the best, you know, but we all are in this kind of big pot together, and we kind of, you know, vibe off of each other, we can make a better world. So that's really been my impetus since founding Anyanwu, and even before then.
Absolutely. And you also manage poets as well?
Yeah, I do. The one that people might know the most about is Sekou Sundiata, who passed away in 2007, the year before my mother died. He was not only a client, he was my absolute best friend. Like, he's a person, he's like my older brother. I talk to every single day. But he was such a prolific poet. You know how Gil Scott Heron is prolific in that way, taking really deep concepts or breaking them down for the masses to understand? Sekou was like that with his poetry. I was also his kidney donor, so we were tight. You know, but you know, it's a beautiful story. I have to say, there were 5 of us, all non-related, when we found out that his kidney, he was on dialysis, and that he needed a transplant. So his girlfriend, myself, and 2 other friends all got tested, and his nephew actually. Well, the nephew didn't go forward, but there were 6 of us actually in Sydney, another friend. But the 4 of us went forward together. We went and got tested together. Then we get results. We came back and we had what we called our transplant dinners, where we would then rank ourselves on. At the time, I was young, right? I was young and had no children, in perfect health. So I became the first, and ironically, we matched. So I was the first. Then there was, I think, Claude was the next. Then Bill was the next, and then finally his girlfriend. So then, because she had a young girl at the time, she had a young daughter. So she was like, and then, so we decided, okay, she would take care of Sekou when he came out of the hospital, and I would stay in Brooklyn in their house when I came out of the hospital. And that's what we did. And to this day, I have a backup donor.
Wow.
That's the other thing we did. They say, okay, if anything else happens to your kidney, we know we're a match. So, yeah.
Well, we have a clip from his,
good.
From the Def Comedy Jam.
Oh yeah, Def Poetry Jam.
Excuse me, I'm just.
No, that's okay. I think that was when Mos Def used to host it.
Mos Def is introducing him. So Sekou Sundiata, let's take a clip. Take a look at the clip of him reading some prolific poetry.
I'm proud and honored to present Sekou Sundiata.
It's a little hot up here than I expected. Thank you. I think all the other poets raised the temperature. Come on and bring on the reparations. Oh, master of the perfect word universe, technological forked tongue, riddle me this. If the Chinese can come from China and the French can come from France, what made you think you could get niggas out of Africa in the first place? Just because you put puppies in the oven, that don't make them biscuits. Reparations on GP. Come on and bring on the reparations. For all the unrequited home runs, brothers be burning up the bases, the crowd be going mad, brothers be crossing over home plate, go outside and can't get a cab. For Little Richard teaching the Beatles how to scream like Aunt Jemima without their pancakes. And all the other dark and unknown rockers electrified, the Republic sanctified, shaking that Cold War out the booty body politic. Come on and bring on the reparations. For the beat in beatnik, white Negroes and such, getting off up under that great music and them little ass 5 spots for the jazz in the jazz age, making your women wiggle and squirm and you trying to twist and do the worm. Your abstract expressionism jism dripping. You might say, if I was you, I would go on the road and howl too. Jimmy Dean and Elvis, they can go to wherever they went. Marilyn too, except she got caught in a trick and got bent out of that cute little shape she had going. Come on and bring on the reparations. For the Birmingham Gospels, 4 little girls come Sunday. For the Jesus remix in those redneck streets, fire hose, mad dog, crucifix, and what exactly did you say you was doing at the time of our soft shoe on the rock of edges? For the privilege in your skin, a wounded knee, a trail of tears for the Indian in us. Come on and bring on the reparations. For the spook with the metal detector sitting by your door. Open just enough, probably a moon full of cocaine on the table. Monica on her knees doing secret service. You humming mum under wraps. And what about all those flags we so proudly hailed? Marvin Gaye singing, oh, say can you see? Wearing shades like mirrors at the All-Star game so you can reflect yourself, relaxed and feeling good. The dark looker doing his looking like he was blind, bearing witness to the whiteness of whiteness, pretending you was the only one who could see. 'Tis after all about thee, just like you like it. Mercy, mercy me, and so on and so forth. For the missing royalty checks, and so on and so forth. For VD and Tuskegee called syphilis, and so on and so forth. Think of it. Think of it as a down payment on the interest compounded. Them 40 acres notwithstanding. That mule notwithstanding. Multiplied, quantized, digitized. What to say about forgiveness between you, huh? And your God. Come on and bring on the reparations.
Bring on reparations.
Yes.
I love that piece. I love that piece.
Me too. It's a wonderful piece.
Yeah, and like you said, that really circles back to the work that WPFW is doing.
Absolutely.
And providing, the education and just the different things that are going on in the community and how people truly feel when they're out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say that, I talked about WPFW having been the space for the voiceless, for the marginalized, but really, I would say it's more a space for the empowered. And I say that because any change in a community comes from those that are most affected by what's going on. You know what I mean? So it's not the voiceless that we speak to and that we bring forth. It's those that are empowered, who have found their voice and are trying to make a difference in their communities. We just amplify it, literally, And so reparations for African Americans, that's a long time coming, and it had that fight, that charge has been there for many, many years. And we continue to believe that that is something that African people in America should have. And you'll hear programming that speaks to that on WPFW, but you'll also hear programming that speaks to North Africa and the Middle East. You'll hear programming that speaks to Sub-Saharan Africa, programming that speaks to the LGBTQ experience, programming that speaks to children, to performance. Anything you can think of, we really try to offer it.
Yeah, and that seems just as diverse as your passions, your work, the things that you've done. What are some of your favorite experiences thus far?
Favorite? Oh, that's funny.
Well, I'm hearing Pakistan, Germany, Morocco.
Well, so I wouldn't say this.
I'm not saying traveling. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying traveling, but just over the overall array of kind of things.
That experience in Lahore, it really brought tears to my eyes because you have two men who've never met each other, have only heard each other's work on the stage, and it said, oh, we gotta, just naturally, he came, this gentleman called the King of Lahore came up on stage and was like, but that same tour, I got to meet Stella Chiweshe, who is one of the, she just passed away, she is a woman Mbira player in Zimbabwe. Bad. And I was stunned. Like I got on the bus to go to the festival and she's like sitting there. And I was like, oh my gosh. I know people are like, who is Stella Chiweshe? Yeah. Look her up, folks. Look her up. I've had, I really have had, I've been really blessed. Like I have so many wonderful experiences. I was on Fresh Air with Terry Gross, with Sekou.
Yeah.
Sekou did a multimedia piece called The 50. Me too. Yeah. She's a fantastic interviewer, right? Like we all learn, right, from her. He did a multimedia piece called The 51st Dream State.
Okay.
And at the time, I was actually the tour manager for that piece.
Mm-hmm.
It was managed by an organization, wonderful organization out of New York called MAP. Shout out
What
to.
was it about?
It was about the 51st dream state and America, everyone around the globe dreaming the same dream that America dreams, and globalism and the exportation of jobs and well, everything we're seeing now, really,
Right.
in terms of our international, how we deal with the world. You know, they say so goes America, so goes the world. But the 51st Dream State really dealt with the some of the ugliness of that.
Is it a fictional piece?
It's a multimedia piece. So there
Okay.
is there's film that's going on. There's a full ensemble, I think
Okay.
10-piece ensemble. There's singers, and of course Sekou was the poet.
Right.
Narration. But we were in Philadelphia promoting the piece, and so he did an interview with her, and then she was like, "Can I talk to you about the transplant?" And I was like, "What?" And so we're talking, right?
Yeah.
And, Terry Gross, and I was enamored too, so it was hard.
Of course.
She's
Who
like,
wouldn't be?
she's like, "Can I see the scar?" And I'm like, "Yeah." Now this is radio,
Yeah.
and I'm like, "Sure." And I just pull up my see when you're young, you don't care. I just pull up my shirt. She's like, "Wow, that's quite a scar." And we just had a good laugh,
Yeah.
And I've had so many wonderful. I can't tell you, just wonderful. Cape Town. Oh, being in Cape Town and meeting the great Dorothy Masuku and Abigail Kubika, who actually are also Mama Africas in the way we know Miriam Makeba to be, except they decided to stay in apartheid South Africa. Dorothy Masuku had to go to neighboring Botswana at one point. She had to go into exile. And Abigail Kubika, who's still, Dorothy Masuku just died a few days ago, about a week ago. But Abigail Kubika is still with us. And she talks about, and this tells you, it informs how fortunate we are, right? She talks about under apartheid, she would be singing with a mixed band. So it couldn't be seen by the audience, all white audience. They had to sing behind a curtain. They would do their gig. The club owner, to keep his license, would call the police and say that these Kafirs were breaking curfew. The paddy wagon would be waiting outside. The band would come out, get in the paddy wagon, go to the jail, be arraigned. They get out at 7:30 in the morning. They go to sleep. They come back and do it again, all over again, because art was so important. And also that was their way of resisting under apartheid South Africa. That was their resistance. You're not going to break us. You're not going to keep us from doing what we love, even if we have to do it in these conditions.
And every single
and it
day,
was
weekend.
and so isn't that instructive to everybody? Like no one, if you can just hold on, and I really want to say this to people because I've suffered from depression. If you can just hold on another day, something is coming around the corner. Your mother, I wish I could remember the saying that your mother gave us before.
We say it all the time. If it's not all right, sorry, she says it all the time. It's it'll all be all right in the end. And if it's not all right, then it's not.
It's not the end. And all people, just remember that. But especially Black people. We're in a time right now where we are being challenged on every level. This government shutdown hurt a lot of us. A lot of us, and some have not recovered. Some may never recover.
Right.
Because but if we can just hold on, whatever you're going through, whatever condition you find yourself in, no matter how horrific, if you hold on, God's not done with you yet. No. The Creator, the great whatever, the Great Spirit, if you're Native American, whomever that entity is, the goddess, whomever that entity is that you think keeps you here. And if you're atheist, maybe it's yourself. I mean, my daughter says she's an atheist. I'm like, okay, we'll go with that.
Sure.
But, but whatever keeps you here, just hold on to it for another day. And really, there is something around the corner. Everyone has a purpose.
Absolutely. And what have you found your purpose to be? I don't know if that's a heavy question. I feel like we talked about it a lot today.
Yeah. Well, I will say that it changes. My focus now, I'm really into equity work, racial equity work, but other kinds of equity work. I sit on 2 boards where we're trying to make that a reality. The Tacoma Park Co-op board, the board of my daughter's nursery school and kindergarten. And so we're working on equity. I started a diversity circle with the high school students at my daughter's high school because the students wanted something. So equity work is really a passion of mine. Also, I'm rediscovering the continent, in really wonderful and marvelous ways. I finally envision myself living in sub-Saharan Africa at some point. And I want to bring the power, as you know, that is community radio, community media, to places where there's not something like that, you know, where young people can find a voice. Anyone can. You know, it's great, too. With radio, all you need is a mic and a vision.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, you know, some good music is nice, or a good theme and good guests are nice, but really, you have a mic and a vision, you have power.
Do you think that would be, obviously it kind of will be, but I want to hear your answer to that. Do you think that would be difficult to do, being a woman in those kind of regions?
You know, I have traveled a lot in Africa, both North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, and I haven't encountered, I will say, I haven't encountered anything like that.
Okay.
The one time I did was in actually Turkey.
Okay.
And I was in the old city, and I was covered, you know, and that's the thing that we have to understand too, right? When we travel other places, we need to respect, other customs, you know,
and
so
cultures, right?
You know, yes, you put on a headscarf, you know, but what I didn't have is a man accompanying me.
Okay.
And even the police there, this is the only time I felt threatened. But even the police there, they had this kind of scowl, you know, on their faces, like, here's a woman unaccompanied. I didn't let it deter me. I kept walking across this very long bridge, and I went to see the Hagia Sophia and all the Topkapi Castle and all these things. But that was the only time I felt as a woman kind of threatened. But that was only one part of Turkey. I've been to other parts of Turkey.
It's the entire
most
country.
Places in the world, I've never felt that. And no, I don't feel like that's a hindrance. It might have been, and you know, it might be, but honestly, that could be a hindrance here. I've been a tour manager, because often men are tour managers, right? And I've had club owners say, well, where's the tour manager? And they'll go up to some guy in the band, and they're like, well, she's over there. And then they're like, right, exactly. Or, as my daughter explained to me the other day, there's something called mansplaining, you know, where men try to talk to you as if you don't understand because you're a woman. And I've had a few incidents like that, but my overarching experiences have been wonderful and inclusive.
That's wonderful. What about your art? I can't imagine being surrounded by so much art, so much creativity, and not feel inspired to do something myself.
Well, so I curate my radio show.
Okay.
I really do curate it too. You know, like tomorrow, for instance, the theme will be revolutionary women.
Okay.
And looking at the former murdered council member, Marielle, can't think of her last name, from Brazil, though, a queer woman from Brazil who was murdered, her and her driver were murdered.
Recently?
15, well, she served 15 months, so it wasn't recently, it's a few years ago now. But I also think about Dorothy Masuku, who, who, as I said, stayed in South Africa to build jazz there, was exiled to Botswana, but another revolutionary woman. I think of Angela Davis. So curating music is one way I express myself, but I also have a penchant for redoing furniture. So when my daughter was little, I would make things for her room. So I made a hanger clothes bar, you know, I made it, and I redid a chair. I love like painting, and I really love wall painting. I love, you know, tactile kinds of things. So
that's wonderful.
That's my art.
Yeah, at least you have
curating music
should have some kind of release.
Yeah.
But in curating music and curating your radio show, and you really, as interim program director, what does WPFW have coming up, or any exciting events?
We have some exciting things. So on March 28th, we will be broadcasting live from the AFL-CIO. Excuse me. There is a excuse me. There's a wonderful piece about. So sorry.
No worries.
Thank you. There's a wonderful piece that's written called "We Were There."
Okay.
And it's about women in labor history. And so we'll be broadcasting live at the AFL-CIO. It's absolutely free, Washington, D.C., from 3 until 4:30. And then we will, on the 29th at Bethesda Blues and Jazz, we have the incomparable Cassandra Wilson coming in, doing a fundraiser for us and celebrating 42 years on the air.
That is incredible.
It is incredible. We cannot wait. She is phenomenal. She's a friend. March 29th.
March 29th.
She is incomparable on so many levels. Like, people know her singing, but again, she's a revolutionary woman. Her stance on the arts and artists and how they take control of their art is so inspiring, so progressive. So I don't know if we'll have time for a little bit of that when she's performing, but I hope people can hear her because she is really something else.
Yeah,
So.
and that's March 29th where?
Bethesda Blues and Jazz.
And time? Do we know?
8 p.m.
8 p.m. That is Bethesda Blues and Jazz, 8 p.m. March 29th.
Yes.
Anything else you want to share with the people before we wrap up today?
I am just so thrilled to have been here with
Thank you for
You have
joining us.
such a bright future ahead.
Thank you. I hope so.
Yes, absolutely. And I thank your producer. And I'm always thrilled to see young people doing what they love to do.
Well, I want to thank
you
you
were
for
great at
joining
it.
us.
Yes.
It's been a pleasure. I've learned a lot. I hope you all have too. Miss Katea Stitt.
Oh, you're welcome, sweetie. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for joining us again for a fantastic episode of Book It Now. Remember, if you would like to be a guest on the show, you can visit our website, www.bookitnowtv.com. Until next time, if no one has told you that they love you today, remember that I do, and I always will. Good night.